Welcome to part 4 of What Matters the Least. In video number 1, I talked about how books change our lives. And I'm really going to kind of go back and take a trip back to that video here to explore what matters the least in a different lens. And I do a lot of speech writing, and one of the things that I like to do in speech writing is come up with a power of 3 and have 3 ideas in one speech. And we're going to combine that idea with Books Change Our Lives, all for what matters the least. And for anyone that knows me, they know 3 favorite authors in the whole wide world: Matthew Kelly, who I now work with, Wayne Dyer, and of course Richard Rohr. So the What Matters the Least, the power of 3, it's actually going to be 3 ideas in one. And the first one comes from the Wayne Dyer book, The Shift, and he actually talks about it. Really, it's a common theme in all of his books. And that is, one of the things that matters least is the good opinion of others. What matters the least, in many cases, is the good opinion of others. If I asked 30 different people what they thought of me and I asked them to write a paragraph, I know at the end of the day, I would really get 30 different answers. And I so agree with Dr. Dyer. In our lives, we have to be independent of the good opinion of others. I concern myself with the opinion of one. For me, that's God. And as long as I'm good there, I'll be good in the other ones. And the second idea that I want to cover in this of what matters the least comes from Matthew Kelly. And it's a common theme in all of his books. And the idea in all of his books is that we're meant to become the best versions of ourselves. We're meant to become the best versions of ourselves. I've now had the fortunate opportunity to share that idea with thousands of people through working at Floyd Consulting. And it's one of the rare ideas that's out there that I've never had anyone say, that sounds like a bad idea, being the best version of myself. I mean, I've never had anyone happen to say that. So what matters the least, part 2, is that anything that doesn't help us to become the best version of ourselves, it really needs to not matter in our lives. And when we quit letting things that don't help us become the best version of ourselves matter anymore, we start to develop really deep yeses, things to say yes to. And when we know what to say yes to, then we know what to say no to. And the third one comes from Dr. Richard Rohr. It's absolutely been one of my favorites. When I was a little kid in first grade at Wekiva Elementary School, I was kind of the runt of the litter. And as the runt of the litter, when I would go to PE class, when all the other kids were looking forward to going to PE, I was always horrified because I knew what was going to happen. I knew what was going to happen, and it horrified me. I could not enjoy PE class because our PE teacher was kind of lazy, and our PE class always looked like this. He picked the 2 strongest boys to be captains. In whatever sport we were playing, they would pick the other teammates. And I would always be picked last. I would always be picked last every time. In fact, not only was I picked last all of the times, they would always have a fun deliberation and poke fun at me as being last, and I don't want him, and I don't want him, and I don't want him. And been one of the hardest things I've ever had to let go of in my life was that feeling of feeling like I was completely worthless. Been a tough one to let go of, and really led to a lot of challenges in life. So this is a common theme in Richard Rohr's about what matters the least. And Richard Rohr says that the only exclusion that God has is exclusion itself. The only exclusion God has is exclusion itself. And I can tell you from being picked last for kickball and being excluded in every class that one's true. And that's really 3 ideas of what matters the least: exclusion, the opinion of others, things that don't help us become the best version of ourselves. But it just so happens in all of my readings, I studied Steve Jobs a lot because he's a great speaker. And he's famous for all of his keynotes of saying, just one more thing, just one more thing. So even though I do love the power of 3, I want to honor Steve Jobs today and give you just one more thing. And I think it's the biggest. 2012, I'm laying on the ground in my gym, I'm crying. Somebody gives me a copy of Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, it's all about turning your suffering into meaning, which I hope these videos are creating meaning in your lives. But that's not the lesson from that book that I want to focus on today. And it's really the whole reason I wanted to revisit this idea of books change our lives. When Dr. Frankl was in Auschwitz, he had to dig pipes, dig ground and pipe for pipes for the concentration camp. And the ground was frozen. And this one day, being malnourished, he had to dig in frozen sand, and he couldn't do it, and he was about to give up on his life when one of the Nazi prison guards came over and said, you swine, you filthy swine. I will show you how to dig, and I'll make you dig with your mouth, you pig." And Dr. Frankl was reflecting on that in his barracks that night as he survived the situation and went on to write one of the greatest books of all time. And he said the worst part about that whole situation was that this Nazi German guard was judging him and knew nothing about his life. And that's the last part of today's video. What matters the least is judgment. What matters the least is judgment. It's not our responsibility, and it's exhausting. So what matters the least is, in essence, judgment. As we're going to go through lives, it's much better to lose judgment and instead find the perfection in the imperfection.
Launching this channel with my dad on his birthday is something I will never forget. Our first video we ever posted was titled Wake Up Call, and it now has over 1,200 views, which is just crazy. And launching this channel really helped me push out what matters the least, like my shyness and anxiety, and help me bring in what matters the most, like spreading positive messages and making a difference. Thank you so much for watching, and please hit like, subscribe, and share.